listen, we really want to do this Agile thing, but we tried it before and Agile doesn't work here.
Agile doesn't work here is one of the most common things I hear from organizations that are struggling with Agile in some way, shape, or form, right? So that's the first thing is, oh yeah, welcome. What are you saying we should be doing? Agile? Oh, no. That doesn't work here. We tried that. We tried that Agile thing here a couple of years ago. It doesn't work. When you dig deeper, you find out that when they say it doesn't work there, and you ask the question, well, what have you actually done before? Just asking to find out. And it turns out that they say they've adopted some theoretical practices, adoption of Agile events, and they say it doesn't work for them. So, for example, the most common thing I hear is our teams are on 2-week sprints. We've been on 2-week sprints for a while. Not seeing any value out of that. Right? We're not seeing these milestones met on our Gantt charts. We thought we might, and we're not. So it doesn't work here. That's the most common thing we see. Mm-hmm. The other thing we see is the teams say that they are delivering every sprint, exactly what they commit to, and yet the customers are not happy. The recipients of the products are not happy. Those are the two things that I see all the time when organizations say Agile doesn't work for us. So they must be really special because it doesn't work for them, but it works for a lot of people. Oh, by the way, including some of their competitors. It works for them just fine. They're in the same competitive arena that you're in, and yet it works for them. Why doesn't it work for you? What does it mean when they say it doesn't work for them? Let's go there first.
You started with two scenarios, which is I am on 2-week sprints and I see no benefit from it, and my customers are not happy.
Yeah.
Two completely separate statements. Telling me that you have adopted Agile practices and that your customers are not happy. I would definitely want to dig into that first, because Agile in its purest form should be talk directly to the customer, the team that's doing the work, figure out what the customer wants, go off and do that for a couple days and come back to the customer and then adjust based on what the customer says about the work that you've done. When you say the customers are not happy, it makes me think that you're doing Agile, but you've put a firewall in between your teams and the customers. You're doing Agile, but the customers don't get to weigh in but once every, quarter, right. Once a year when you have conferences. I'm ready to question, to lightly question.
Lightly question, gently prod.
With a white glove, question your methods.
So I just want to go back to the first thing you said, which is the customers are not happy. And are they seeing what they need to see every so often, right? Or are they only engaged once in a while? It's one of the anti-patterns I see as they say, well, the teams are doing good, but our products aren't really that polished, and we really don't want to expose our dirty laundry in front of the customers. Yeah. So they're not invited to our demos because we don't want to demo this stuff. It's just not polished yet. And so they keep doing this stuff, sprint in, sprint out, until at some point when the customer says, what do you have for me? I've been waiting patiently. Mm-hmm. They look at it, and that's when they say, Jace, this isn't what we want, right? Because many sprints have gone by. Now it's too late to quickly pivot. Organizations that do that typically are the ones that are smarting from this whole experience, and they say, I see, we tried it. We tried Agile, it doesn't work for us. You didn't really try it. So I think that line, you didn't really try to be Agile, is pervasive among everybody that I've come across that says Agile doesn't work here. They didn't. They say, well, we tried it a year ago, 2 years ago, it didn't work for us. And I dig into it and say, what did you try? And they say, well, our teams were doing 2-week sprints. Well, who was really kind of feeding into your backlog? Who was looking after the customer's interest? I find there's huge gaps usually there. The customer's not even involved in this big picture in many cases. In many cases, it's internal people just basically trying to make sure that their turf, if you will, is protected.
Right.
And you get this. It's not me, right? It's not me, because look, I've got a backlog. That's all I'm responsible for. Right. The dev teams go, well, we're just popping off the top of the stack, right, for the backlog. the poor customer says, we're not seeing anything. And then the organization or the leadership says, we tried Agile. You really didn't try Agile.
Yeah.
And so don't say it doesn't work for you because you didn't do it.
I don't see a way to talk about keeping the customer out of the conversation or not showing the customer our process wall, the table's all dirty because we got stuff all over the place and we haven't arranged things properly or whatever, other than either ego or fear of not projecting that we have all of our business together and everything in the right places. Projecting that we are perfect and we got everything going, So I don't know if those are the same thing or they're actually different. I'm really not sure at this point. But most of the places that I've been that say, well, you can't put these developers in front of the customer because they might not be able to give a polished performance and they might not be able to answer all their business questions about where in the future this is going to be or whatever. I'm like, that. I mean, unless you're dealing with some kind of aliens or robots or whatever, like it's just people dealing with people. So the best thing we could do is answer their questions honestly, and if we don't know. Or if we haven't thought about something, just say that we don't know and we haven't thought about it.
Right.
On one hand, I want to attribute it to people's egos, like especially when, they might make me look bad in front of the customer, or the customer might not think, the customer might communicate with somebody else in the company or whatever, and I'm afraid that I, usually saying I, meaning somebody in some sort of supervisory role, referred to as someone who maybe isn't projecting the vision or maybe whose people don't really know what they're talking about or whatever, and then somehow it will reflect on me. So again, there is some sort of ego, career move, ego consideration that's behind this. Keep customers away from XYZ team or whatever. The other side of this is I have to think, ever since we did the podcast on the John Cotter's Leading Change, when Curtis was here, we did a podcast on Leading Change, the book. And one of the things he references in Leading Change is the vision that is being pushed by the executives. It needs to be broadcasted out through every layer of the organization. Every time the executives bring up how the work ties back to the vision, they need to be quoting the vision. They need to be referencing the vision. They need to be talking about the vision. They need to be basically repeating the vision over and over and over and over again so that everybody in the whole company is on the same page with that vision. So I want to blame leadership and say part of it is just weak leadership with egos and people who really shouldn't be in that position. However, some of it is the strategy level that should be coming from executives just is not present, and people truly are. If different teams seem to be running at their own speed, it could be that. It could be, hey, Agile doesn't work here because Agile, which normally should thrive in chaos, doesn't work because we change directions so frequently or so much is in a state of change.
Yeah. The irony of that, though, right? That's exactly why you need Agile.
Except we welcome changing requirements. The issue here is not changing requirements that benefit the customer. The issue here is the management layer of the organization constantly changing their mind and kind of battling between each other and wasting a lot of time building the wrong things because the viewpoint of the customer is not promoted as the first priority. I
think that's right. And, I think sometimes, quite often, in fact, leadership are gun shy of failure. Right? This fear of failure. So they do communicate with the customer that we're going to be agile. Mm-hmm. We're going to be responsive to your needs, right? And we'll be emergent. Okay, we'll do all of these things, except they're not really sure how to do this because, again, we've talked about this before. They didn't get into their positions by becoming agile, right? They got into their positions over the years.
Or by failing.
Following a plan.
Right.
And exactly, right? Not failing and all of that, right? Supposedly not failing. So when teams say, hey, look, we need to pivot, they go, no, I've already communicated XYZ to the customer. You can't pivot. Right? So part of that is that inbuilt organizational inertia that kind of gets in the way of Agile, quote unquote, working. The other part of it is, and this is, I think, significant as well, is the focus on the wrong things. Meaning that when they adopt Agile, according to their own definition, however they're doing it, the teams are now on 2 week sprints, whatever they're doing, the metrics that they use to assess whether that shift is working for them or not, it's often cast in this shroud of self-belief, right? If we just say the teams will increase the velocity and our agility is working, that kind of thing. So the focus is on that sort of thing, mechanical metrics like increase velocity, increase speed of delivery, but are you delivering the right thing as opposed to just delivering things, and not involving the customer's voice right up front. So show them something at the end and say, is this what you want? And they say no. And they come back and the customer doesn't really know what they want. We thought they said yes to this and now they're saying no. Guess what? We're not going to involve them in future reviews. Mm-hmm. Those sorts of things, right? So I think it kind of goes into various directions there when they say it doesn't work here. But the bottom line is they really didn't try to be agile in the sense of being agile, responding to change, which means welcoming change, which means listening to customers, which means involving customers throughout the process. All of that wasn't there. It was basically, okay, we're going to adopt some practices, and therefore we must be agile.
Yeah.
Right?
If you have a deep-seated fear of failure, this is speaking as a product manager, right? If you have a deep-seated fear of failure, like maybe product management is not the job for you. Like, for the people here that may have randomly found our podcast, if you are afraid of being told that your ideas are all terrible and that they won't work and that you have to prove that they're going to work before you're allowed to do anything on your own, and that is like that is too much for your fragile ego to deal with. Like, this is like, you need to get out of product development and find another job. Like, this, it's not gonna work. It's just it's a bad career field to be in, because a lot of times you will come up with ideas that they are good ideas, and you'll never have the ability to implement them because either the customer market isn't there, or the numbers aren't there, or the evidence isn't there, or even like I feel this is the one that isn't talked about very often, is the ability you have to expend to go get those numbers. The company's just not willing to even invest time in that,
right?
Which stinks, because then you don't even get a solid. Oh, this was a good idea, but it doesn't work for our business. You don't even get that. You get, we don't have the money to invest in the time it takes to figure out if this is a good,
Yeah, so if you're afraid of failure, you're not likely to experiment, right? Because you want certainty. That's what you want. And certainty only gets you one thing. It gets you a cul-de-sac. You're going to go down a path, and that's it. You hope your customer's there. But even if they're there, it's a cul-de-sac. You're not going any further, right? So if you have that mentality of avoiding experimentation, you're stifling innovation. You're stifling the possibility of inventing things, finding a better solution for your customer. Yeah, all of this is just pointing to one thing. Agility doesn't work for you. And it doesn't work for you because you want certainty. Those two things are kind of paradoxically opposed, right? Yep. You want certainty, guess what? Don't do Agile.
Do you want certainty or do you want control? Because the difference is, I think like power companies or telecoms, this is specifically in America because I don't know about outside America, but the phone companies or the cable companies or the internet providers, the ISPs in America, the power utilities in America, like they're all basically monopolies in their area. Sure. So you want certainty. The certainty is basically if you live in this geographical area and you want this particular service, the certainty is you have the choice. You either get the service or you don't.
Right. One provider.
That's it.
That's the monopoly. Yeah.
So when I think about control, like the need for control, and I think about like the need to reduce uncertainty, now we're going to we're borderline going into our podcast on plans right now. So I don't know how deep we're going to get on this subject.
Explore a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know how deep we're going to get on the subject because you have a whole nother podcast on this specific thing. But the fix that grinds against that need for control, that wears down that need for control, I don't know, it is to basically decentralize. It's to decouple things. Mm-hmm. So and then to basically scale your organization by not scaling. Rather than scaling up and down, you scale sideways.
Right.
You get more product owners. You trust them to do the job that in the area that they're assigned in the product or the products they're assigned to, whatever. But that inability to trust, which I label as the need for control.
Right.
Like some organizations, that inability to trust is pitched as a good thing. I think of organizations that I've been at that have a lot of. I think of the best project managers I've ever worked with. That inability to trust.
Yeah.
But as a professional skill. the best project managers that I've ever worked with, they don't let you slide on anything. If there's something that needs to be done, they will say, who is going to handle this deliverable? And then when somebody raises their hand finally after staring everyone down, because the best project managers, believe it or not, are okay with silence. They will let something linger.
Sure.
Like I've been I would say probably the majority of project managers that I've been around, they have to fill the silence with something. But the best ones are comfortable with the silence, and then they'll wait for someone to volunteer. And then as soon as a person volunteers, I guess I can. I don't think that's a lot. I can deal with it. And then they won't ask, when can you have it back to me by? They will pick a date out of the air and lay it on them and say, well, since you said you can do this, can you have it back to me? It's Friday at 4:30 p.m. Do you think you can have it back to me by the end of today?
Well, that's a generous question. And normally it's like, you need to have it back to me by this date and time, right? And is there anything you see standing in your way? And you're now thinking about this, thinking, what do I know? Let's take stock. What risks do I? No, you don't. Okay, good. You're on. That's what typically happens. This is classic risk deference. These people that do this are deferring the risk of failure from themselves to somebody else on the team.
Sure.
Which is really just horrible.
Right.
Right. And it contributes absolutely to this whole idea of, it doesn't work here. Well, no, it doesn't work there.
Well, let's say that you do that professionally. Let's say that you do, like you're a professional risk delegator. You delegate risks to other people, and then when the risks end up being satisfied and then turn out where there's no risk, then you are a champion. But if the risks fall through and become full-blown catastrophes, then the person who failed is on the hook for like this.
That's right. You've just described project management.
It's so slick. Like, this is so slick. If you're, but I brought this up to say the culture where control is the main goal of the business. That we feel that we're in control of everything, right? Yep. There would be culturally an inability to trust culturally, because you've got people like that in the organization.
Yeah, this is classic old school, old style project management, where a project manager would look at something as a piece of work, break it down, and say, this is what needs to happen, and assign it to an individual and say, here's your work breakdown package. Mm-hmm. That's what it was called. That's a real term in project management. WBS, the work breakdown structure. Yeah. So you have a structure that basically says, here are the individuals that are assigned this lot of work. And the project manager, I don't know what makes them qualified for this, but they would decide how much work, the type of work, etc., each individual is doing. And again, I just go back to that term, risk deference. They're deferring the risk from themselves, because they're the project manager, to the doers of work. So these doers can do perfectly well with everything, but it comes down to the prowess and the proficiency of the project manager to say, this is the right work to do, the right people to do the work, the right time to do the work, etc., right? And typically, that's not been the case in my experience, because these people are not ones that have actually done the work themselves. They don't understand what it takes to do the work. Yeah. They are a manager of basically a project plan. And the one question they ask every day is it done yet?
Yeah.
That's the organization that supposedly adopts agility and says Agile doesn't work here, because that's the ingrained culture you have.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But with a culture like that, I am not even sure where you would start. Yeah, it's made even worse if all your if all your individual developers, like team members, what we think of as team members, are all contractors, and the project managers are permanent employees. The levels, it makes it so insurmountable at that point.
Right.
Yeah, I don't even know where I would start. For people listening, I'm trying not to leave people listening to this podcast in complete despair.
So we've just talked about why Agile doesn't work here. Mm-hmm. And we can kind of go to some of the reasons which you've already started doing. So what do you do about that? Mm-hmm. Right? That's the next thing, I guess, for those people listening, wondering, where are these two guys going with this stuff? What do you do about that? Right? First things first is recognize that it's not Agile that's not working. you're not really doing anything agile. You're simply putting labels on it.
Right.
Look at your Scrum Masters. Your newly branded, newly minted Scrum Masters are your project managers that have just been given a new title. Your product owners, do they have a clue about product ownership, or are they just people that were there in the organization that were just told, hey, guess what? Mary, Fred, Joe, you're now a product owner. Yeah. You're not going to succeed by doing that. So look at those kinds of things and say, really? We're not agile. We're not doing anything agile, so that we cannot expect success. If you're in that situation where agile doesn't work there in your organization, how do you go forward from there? After you've got enough gumption built in to say to your leadership, whatever it is we're doing that's not working, it isn't agile. So let's do a couple of small things that are agile, right? Let's get the customer involved and listen to them. Really listen. Let's get the teams to say what they can deliver towards what the customer is saying in a given period of time, and get early feedback, early and constant feedback. If you do those things, you're well on your way, because you're going to find in the longer term, medium to longer term, you are successful compared to what you're doing today and claiming that it's agile and you're not being successful. The battle, though, you're going to have, I have to say, is not with your teams. It is probably also not with your customers. The battle you're going to have, the challenges you face, will be with your senior to executive leadership, because those people have the fixed mindset of how work is done in the command and control CNC environment. You need to break those shackles, and that is easier said than done. This is where you need somebody to come in and say, I've been telling the same things to our leaders, but when somebody from outside comes in and says exactly the same thing, it may have a shot at being successful, because now it's from another source from outside the organization, right? A supposedly perceived expert.
Let's talk about that one, because that's where people either start their agile journey, or their agile journey gets reinvigorated or gains steam or gains momentum, is sponsorship. Usually what I hear is, well, we have this person in the executive team, or the company just hired this CIO or CXO, whatever it is. Yeah. And they came from a company that used Agile, and now they're here and they think it's important. So they made a case. They're bringing in product owners, they're bringing in Scrum Masters, maybe they're bringing in Agile coaches. So there is a sponsor at the C level,
right,
who's sponsoring the whole Agile initiative at the company. The other thing I've heard is, we had these great processes and the company really believed in it, and then when this person from the C level left, everything went downhill. Yeah. But the ones that have been most successful obviously have been both. Yeah. Bottom down sponsored, while at the same time a strong initiative from the bottom up. So meet them in the middle type of deal. The only people in there that are squeezed are the middle managers who are, hey.
That's a real dilemma with the middle managers, because, again, just like senior leaders, middle managers got to where they are from the old ways of working. Mm-hmm. But we can help. We can help with that. We can help redefine their roles. We can help them by defining the roles that are different now for middle managers than before. So they're no longer command and control. They're no longer, asking the team or demanding of the team why something isn't done based on some arbitrary timeline, pivoting toward enabling the teams, making sure they have the right skill sets, right, to do their jobs. So manage the team in terms of their requirements, right, for skills, for example, making sure that they have what they need in terms of resources, systems, etc., etc. They're enablers in that sense. They're no longer, quote unquote, managers. You're not managing anything at that stage. The team is managing themselves, but you are an enabler. You're really making sure that the team has everything they need in order to succeed. Yeah. Huge shift. Easier to say in a few seconds, but mind shift.
Out of a lot of transformations, and even the cases I just outlined where I kind of left them out of it, this is probably pretty easy to take into consideration, the middle manager. If you train the middle managers as if you were training, like, get them all together, right? I'm also making some assumptions that your company is not massive at this point, because if your company's tens of thousands of employees, like, okay, maybe maybe that's not going to work. But also, what are you transforming in an agile transformation? Let's say you have 1,000 people in your company. I'm going to go big on this one. What if you have 1,000 people in your company? How many middle managers do you have in a company of 1,000? 200. Let's say 200 at the most, right? Okay, well, out of that 200, how many are in the segment of the organization that's quote going agile right now, right? Okay, maybe 10%, so 20 middle managers.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we can take those 20 middle managers, break them into 2 segments, have 2 teams of 10. Maybe we can make them enabler teams that unblock and accelerate other teams, and now they have a new job purpose. But if we don't train them on what their new role is, now that we've, quote, taken all their employees away, taken all their resources away, right? If we don't train them on what their new job is, of course, all they're going to do full time is fight the process.
Sure.
Yeah, of course, that's what they're going to do, because they're being left out of the vision. They're not being given new tools to succeed. I'm expecting that these people are still left in those positions because they've proven themselves at the company. They have leadership skills, stuff like that. They're successful as employees, probably is a good part of probably why they're there. Yep. So you're in a typical agile transformation that I think of. I've been trying not to use the word agile transformation in this podcast. In a typical transformation, these people are left out because the transformation has no place for these people. All of the scaling models I can think of have no place for these people.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think from the perspective of those middle managers, they feel like a loss of control, a loss of worth, right? That's, self-worth.
I mean, you had it right. The unwillingness to decentralize, I think you had it right. Like the part of the unwillingness to decentralize comes from you have the glue between the top of your organization and the bottom of your organization. It's not really top and bottom, but I guess the glue between upstream in your organization and downstream in your organization, it doesn't. I'm not really making any better. I turned it sideways. I'm not really making any better.
Glue between head and tail.
Yeah, the glue between the glue between the pieces.
Yeah.
And again, all your models do this. Even when you go to CSM, even when you go to your introductory CSM, they do this. Oh, you don't need all this. Middle managers, it's all waste. Lean thinking, it's all waste. I mean, let's stop for a second. Like, is it waste? Because from my perspective, when you start talking about scaling and put all these controls in and this overhead in place, like, actually, if we think about it for a second, if the middle management enabling teams were doing their job, you wouldn't need all that waste.
Right.
Because we can just take the people we already have in the organization and just kind of teach them, hey, when stuff falls through the cracks, when communication just kind of falls through the cracks, well, you're talking to everyone because you get a view across teams because you're the enabling team now. Right. But also, since you're probably still the traditional hiring managers and you probably still are doing reviews and stuff like that, you also get to have a deeper interaction with the individuals. So you're seeing both sides. So actually, you kind of are perfectly placed to not let things fall through the cracks.
If the organization treats those folks that way, because oftentimes what happens is they're being told, well, so-and-so that used to work for you and so-and-so else and so-and-so else, they're now not doing that. So the middle managers immediately feel, they're saying, a loss of control by thinking, I don't have as many direct reports as I did before. Right. And that goes to another, I know we're going to talk about this incentives thing, but that goes to a different factor, right? In their quote unquote their performance at their job. It shouldn't be defined by the number of direct reports they have. It should be defined really purely at the same level as everybody else on the team, or even at the same level as they are, middle managers. And then wait for it, those of you that are listening, even the leadership people should be defined at the same scale, meaning how are we delivering to our customers? That's it. Nothing else, right? So when those managers that say, well, I had 50 people reporting to me, now I only have 25 or 30 people. Geez, what am I going to do, right? I'm actually being demoted here. I'm not as valuable. I don't feel like I'm making forward progress in the organization because shouldn't I have more as I go up? That thinking needs to be turned on its head and say, I need to let go. You used the word decentralization earlier. need to let go. Trust people to get the job done and get out of their way. But make sure that if there's anything you can do to help them, you're there for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is not really meant as a statement on anything. Who wants to work for leadership where they have the inability to trust?
Right.
I mean, we're talking about micromanagers at this point. Like,
absolutely.
If they're not micromanagers, they have this overbearing methods of control in place in the organization where they can't let anything go. Or where you're going is you're going down the road of using incentives as a positive thing to propel us through to agility, to further develop our agility.
Yeah.
Usually what I see is the company will talk the talk. They might even walk some of the steps in the walk. They might adjust developments incentives to be more team focused.
Yeah.
But then the rest of the business, sales, marketing, the executives, HR, it's like they don't even know that those different pieces of the organization exist with regard to their incentives. The biggest, easiest one to spot here for me is sales, because they get judged on their ability to sell things. But sell things that is in our software versus sell things that are not in our software doesn't really matter as long as they close a deal.
Right.
And rightfully so. I don't know why I'm defending sales for a second. The business will say, like, sales is they're the lifeblood of the organization. They're the.
I'd say that's wrong. I'll tell you why.
That's what executives will say.
You can have a very, very healthy book of sales, right? But if you're not delivering and your pipeline is blocked, then your salespeople are booking orders all day long and they're collecting their commissions. How is that really helping the organization? I've been lucky enough to be part of one organization where I saw this change over a few years, where sales would not get their commission on signing the contract. They would get a tiered set of events for their commission. So yes, they'll get a little bit when they sign the order. That's fine. And then when the software is delivered in what they call software drops over time until go live, but that wouldn't be the final commission either. It would be go live plus, right? So the white glove period, whatever you call it, all of that, hypercare, all of that is done and dusted, and that's when they get their last chunk of their commission. The whole point of why I'm saying this is because it makes the sales organization, well, there's 2 points I want to make here. One is it makes the sales organization vested in the process. And the second thing is they will not go out and promise the earth because they know they won't get the commission if it doesn't get delivered.
You're right.
So what it did in my experience is it brought them closer to the delivery side of the house, right? So they started saying, well, come out on sales calls with us and make sure that when the customer says, we want your software to do X, Y, Z, that it can do that. Or if it can't do that, let's be upfront and say, we have to make custom changes.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Well, you'll have to pay for some of these, right? Or all of these, depending on what the organization is willing to, where they're willing to meet the customer. That was great because the customer knows going into it before they sign the contract what they're going to get, right? And the salesperson knows that. The delivery organization knows that. So I think that was a very good compromise situation right there. It worked really well. The downside of it was back in the day when sales jobs were prolific. I mean, there lots and lots. They would say, I'm not going to be here long enough to see the rest of my commission.
Right.
Why don't I get everything now? And we're like, that's exactly why not. Because you're going to promise the earth that we can't deliver. You'll collect your money and go, right? So, so those are the 2 points I want to make about this particular topic.
Well, that's exactly the same reason why in the Working Backwards Amazon book, like the executive incentives, like none of them are short term. None of the executive incentives are short term. They're all in company stock, which is realized over a longer term. I mean, I guess you can get company stock and sell it immediately or whatever, but I mean, why would you do that?
Right. You're not vested at that point either.
I mean, like any stock, you wouldn't do that with because it's stock. You know that time in market is better than everything else. The reason I bring that up is I feel about the same thing I feel about the Amazon giving their executives stock, the idea that it's long term. You need to commit to the company long term. You're not just looking in like this typical sales guy comes in and he's 6 months. I'm looking for another job because like why would I try to sell anything when your stuff is, I got to sell it, but then I got to kind of shepherd it through the adoption process, and I got to make sure that there's engagement, and I got to work with maybe a sales engineer or product people or whatever to make sure the software is easy to use, easy to start using, easy to adopt at the customer. They're kind of invested in all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The pushback on this one, it's very superficial in my opinion, but it is pushback, is I can just jump to another company where they give me my incentive. Like as soon as the paper's signed, as soon as the ink is still wet, I'm getting paid.
True, very true. But you won't be there long because this is going to be self-fulfilling, right? So you won't be there long. Yeah. You'll move on.
Nobody will be there long, right?
But I think as we're talking about this incentives issue here, imagine for a second if the way the sales organization's incented, the salespeople are incented, was mirrored in the way your delivery people are incented as well. Yeah. Right? So if you do that, what happens in the long run, it would be remiss in not mentioning this. What would happen in the long run is the customer is happy because the salespeople didn't promise what could not be delivered. They stayed throughout the process with the customer. The delivery organization is happy because of what I just said. Mm-hmm. They didn't have to deliver what could not be delivered, right? So it was real. They could do it piecemeal, make sure that they're organized, they're actually involved with the customer throughout. So they're learning about the needs and inspecting and adapting. Yeah. That's the Agile angle here. Long term, what will happen is you will have loyalty from that customer. You'll have repeat business, right? And you would have great references. Mm-hmm. That sounds all great and utopian and everything, but to your point, salespeople do not want to wait that long. Typically, they want their commission now. Day one.
I get it, but like, do you want to be part of something do you want to be part of something big? Do you want to build something big? If you have happy customers and you're getting great references, aren't you now in the realm of the marketing department? Be like, hey, do you really enjoy using our software? Tell me about how it helps you, and then to sit down with them and get some testimonials. I think if you are lucky enough to really be solving real problems for a customer, like now. I think your marketing department should be doing backflips and should be promoting that.
Well, yeah.
Like the Sound of Music. They should be singing it from every corner of every hill. Yeah. That people are doing a good job.
But how often have you seen that though? How often have you seen the hills are alive? It's rare because of that short-term versus long-term thinking.
Right. Yeah.
Where short-term nearly always trumps long-term thinking.
I'm glad you went there because I wasn't going to go there because I was like, the marketing people have even shorter tenure than the salespeople.
They do. A lot of the times it might be, I'm positing again, it might be due to frustration because they kind of caught between the customer and the sales organization or the actual organization itself, right? Where they're saying, hey, jump, right now. Yeah. We have these quotas to meet.
Yeah. The incentives for the development teams, usually the way that lags is we talked about this on another podcast. Usually the way I've seen that lags is all of your developers have their one-time yearly reviews, but then they go back to their sitting on their Scrum team where they're just a member and they contribute to the sprint goals and they work on things together and maybe they're doing XP, maybe they're actually it'd be different if they were judged and measured as a team, but then they also got some sort of individual, I don't know, one-on-one type of counseling, kind of professional development focused type of stuff. But it's not that. It's they are a team, but then the team is never counseled.
Right. I think the reward system is very individualistic, right, to your point. And some people have different clauses, I guess, right, for their reward mechanism. So somebody might be told, okay, this is your base salary, and then you have this 20% flex pay, which means if you really meet all your objectives that we will decide if you meet them or not, then you could get up to 20% of your salary, for example. I'm just using 20 as an example. And so then when you look at that, who is getting those versus who is not? I'm willing to say your dev team members, your developers, testers, etc., probably aren't. Yeah. Your architects or if you're at a progressive organization, maybe your tech leads, but usually it's the managers that are getting those. Yeah. So if the development team delivers time and time again, then the managers get rewarded there's definitely some sort of imbalance here.
That's a problem.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a problem. I'm also specifically thinking about it, something that doesn't really fit in this topic, but I wanted to bring up anyway, which is if you don't have a resource manager, right? Like a typical people manager.
Yeah.
If you don't have a people manager making the determination of what bonuses and what raises to give people at the end of every year, like if we're truly doing incentives team-based, right, and you somehow can figure out a way to delegate this to be up to the team to deal with, and this assumes also that you don't have hiring managers, that matrix environment that kind of loans people out, that teams truly are, like instead of the matrix environment where like resources are loaned. I'm going to loan you my stapler for a couple weeks. Yeah, resources are loaned.
Yeah, copy paper, stapler.
Well, but people belong to teams, and the groupings, they're members of teams, and they're not really like members of other. There's not other organizations going on. There might be other communities going on that people voluntarily join, but people are employed at the company to be part of that team. That is their specific purpose. Whereas a truly decentralized type of organization, large companies do this. Large companies have databases. They buy, pay, salary and pay information, stuff like that. And they have a low point, a midpoint, a high point for salary, stuff like that. I'm trying to envision in my head like something that an HR person could do on a team somehow would be, hey, we've got this person on the team and they're low, mid, high point in the salary bands, because assuming that the salary bands, maybe they're not hidden, but also maybe the company's not going out of their way to say like this position makes exactly this much money. Like even if you just had the metric of low, mid, high to the salary band, to say, hey, these people are in the software engineering salary band, and along the software engineering salary band, employee A, employee B, employee C, employee D, like A and B are both in the mid, B is in the low, and C is in the high. And then when you come to some sort of like 360 review where people rate each other's performance, I don't know how you would distribute salary bonuses, you know what I mean, that kind of stuff. I don't know how you distribute that to the team to let them do it themselves, but also because companies, like we kind of talked about the need for control and stuff like that. Like this, I feel when we cross this chasm, the very last thing that'll be hanging on by a rope, like down hanging in the chasm somewhere, will be the exact amount of money people make for working in a job role. Because companies will fight tooth and nail to not talk about that. To protect that. So if is there a way you could, I don't know, some kind of mechanism you could say, oh, this person's in the low band, well, maybe we should bring them at least up to the mid band or whatever. Like, I don't know.
I think it can be done. I don't think this is rocket science, honestly. I think a lot of it is just inertia and old school thinking, even among HR people. Now, that is slightly changing. I've seen some rays of hope there, but for the majority of organizations out there, it's, to your point, protect what someone is making, right? And leave it up to the individual to rise up. And that's why there's so much, what's the word for this? Lack, I guess, of innovation. People wanting to better themselves because they don't know if this is going to be worth it. Would I just not ride out my year, 2 years, and then just change jobs because I can instantly go somewhere else and get a $30,000 raise? What's ironic about this, in my view, is the same HR organization that is not willing to invest in their own people are willing to give others that they're bringing in a $30,000 raise. Right. That's insane because you've got someone new coming in as opposed to someone who has domain knowledge, who's vested in your company. So I think it can be done, though, to your point. But to do this, the essential thing that has to happen is to let go of that control of saying, we decide how much you make or you make. Yeah. It's leave it up to the teams, the 360 that you mentioned. Let the teams look at each other and say, look, how do we do? Yeah. And what will come out of that is that those people that either are more senior just because of their depth of experience, or those people that went the extra mile, right? Those people will be voted higher by their peers. And HR can easily come up with some sort of a scale that says, based on how they're voted, is how we will peg their salary increase per year or whatever it is, right? Ideally, though, what I would love to see is bring that customer in to that 360 and then make that decision on a project by project basis rather than on a yearly basis. Because sometimes you have bad times, and it's unfair to penalize people that are good-intentioned, very hardworking people, and through no fault of their own, things didn't work out for a project. So that would be interesting to see in real life, an organization going through that kind of exercise.
Yeah. I could see, every sprint, I could see measuring that. Basically every sprint review, measuring that. Or maybe it doesn't have to be tied with the sprint review event, but basically at the end of every iteration, taking that measurement. Yep. So that at the end of the year, assuming you're doing 2-week sprints or whatever, you've got 24, 26 measuring points. You have somewhere around 20-some measuring points per person. So you have a fair bit of data per person that your HR can come away with and make their determination. Your team, even if everyone contributes their piece and it's just kept separately for one person to make the determination, I feel at least then the one person that's making the determination is making the determination based off of some data, as opposed to how I've seen it done, which is whoever, quote, owns all the, quote, resources just decides who they like the best and who they want to quit and who they don't care if they quit.
Absolutely agree. I think that for this sort of mechanism to work, one thing that is paramount is to keep team churn to a minimum, because it isn't just the person who leaves. Right. It is the fact that they left and now the team is back into forming. Yeah. So it's going to impact everybody. So again, that can be factored in by that person who is looking at this.
Oh boy, wow, what a huge hole in the topic that we were talking about. Like, we completely forgot to talk about when management keeps shuffling your teams. Like, that's a whole different podcast. But when Agile doesn't work here, but also we don't have teams that are committed to working on products. I don't know, we don't even have products. But if you're not willing to designate teams, meaning a group of individuals, there's a concept that I'm hearing now about fluid teams where people just flip over the place all the time. If you're not dedicated to having dedicated individuals who comprise a dedicated team working on a dedicated product or set of products, you're going to have a big difficulty implementing Agile for the first, I could even be convinced that once you're doing that well, what I just said, dedicated people on teams that don't change, knocking out products that are dedicated to those teams, and once you do that, then maybe you can start shifting people around and making your teams a bit more fluid over time. Once you've proven that you know how to do the first set of things.
Right, because you will have matured by then. Yeah. Sadly, though, what I see all the time is people that are shared across different teams, different projects, unrelated often, right? And then they're measured. Like, okay, how did you do against your personal development plan or whatever the heck it is? You cannot do that. Everybody has to row on that boat together. So if you're going to put somebody in some other role for part of their time and then say you're 10 hours here and 30 hours here, but in reality it's a lot less than that because of context switching and all that. Yeah. It just works counterculture to what we're trying to do here.
5 hours on project A, 5 hours on project B, 10 hours on project C.
Right. You add up all that and you're working over 130%.
And more, But but I tell you, in large organizations, those are your rock stars.
Oh yeah, for sure.
They have potential, management, promotion potential written all over them. They're willing to be your stars.
Those are organizations that reward having an over busy calendar as a good thing.
60 plus hours per week. Rock stars. Yeah. We've gone so far from Agile Doesn't Work Here. The last thing we have is the concept of I'll let you deal with this one, Owen, because it's a great one. It's the concept of being hoodwinked into adopting Agile.
Yes.
Agile doesn't work here because we were tricked in the first place.
That's right. Yeah. So again, this is something that I've seen way too often. Going into organizations that say Agile doesn't work here. So what did you try? Well, we were told if we do these things, we'd be Agile. And I look at that and go, yeah, you were sold a bill of goods there. So hoodwinked is a good phrase. You had somebody who was maybe SPCT, SPC, whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be that religion. It could be any religion.
Someone who makes their money,
who has a vested interest in the avenue they're pointing you down, and they come in and say, if you do this, thou shalt be Agile. And here's the real kicker: how long do they hang around? they don't stay with you shoulder to shoulder. They simply say, do this. Trust me on this. I'm going to train everybody in your organization in the side of things in this particular way of working. And once I've done that, you're going to be agile. And when they do that, they leave because they've made their money. They make their money based on certifying people, etc. So this is what I mean by being hoodwinked. The other way I'd say people get hoodwinked into it is the product side of the house. People come in and say, oh, you need this, you need this. And oftentimes they have the lingo. So the organizations are like, oh, wow, he's credit or she is creditable, right? They talk about domain-based design. Wow, what is that? So they get people into a room and they talk about domain-based design. At the end of the day, it isn't anything different. It's just cast the same thing in different language. And they say, if you're doing this, you're agile. And then they're gone. My whole point of both of these examples is these people that come in aren't staying with the organization long enough for them to actually start the turnaround process, let alone actually mature down that path. They're long gone.
Right.
So that's what I mean. You've been sold a bill of goods. You've been hoodwinked into agility. And just because they came in, no matter how credible they are, you think you're agile now, right? Because you paid a lot of money. And this is where it's a double-edged sword for leadership too, because if a leader brought in somebody and paid them a ton of money to come in and say, this is what we need to do, and then they're gone, that leader doesn't want to be the first one to say, hey, look, I failed. I shouldn't have brought that person in.
That's right. It's a sunk cost fallacy is actually what it is. But to me, it's a fixed mindset kicking pretty hard to say, well, I can't admit failure on this one. I can't admit that I spent all this money to send my product people to product school or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
Product school? I don't know if there's a thing.
No, I know what you mean, though.
You know, I sent half of my developers a CSM, 2 days CSM, and then told them they can't talk to anybody leadership and told them I wasn't going to change any of the centralization of my organization. So they basically can't do their job. And now suddenly I got to say, hey, we're agile. I got to try to sell that we're agile, even though all we have clearly done is change some labels, change our project management office to program management office, but we're doing everything exactly the same.
But they brought in some big names. They brought in the likes of McKinsey or Bain that came in and said, here's a model, here's a 7S model. And they got ordained into this model, and then the consultants have gone.
Yeah.
Right? So now it's, okay, it's time to implement. Oh, there's nobody there to help you with that. Right? But we must be agile because we paid that organization, the consultants, a lot of money. And we cannot be seen as having failed as leaders.
The reason I don't have great suggestions here is because my experience in this category was exactly what you just said. Some SBC came in at a company I was at, and the company was trying to figure out Agile, which was a bottom-up approach. It wasn't really sponsored by anyone, C-level or whatever. And the entire executive team was gone for what I swore was a whole week, but maybe it was 2 days. And I'm pretty sure they all came back with their safe Agile certifications. They all came back with their little placards, and they're like, look, we got placards. This is what we're going to do now. We're going to have trains, and we're all going to jump on the train, choo-choo, and we're going to plan 12 weeks or whatever. No, it's 10 weeks, but the one week was like a
the innovation
sprint. Yeah. But the innovation sprint was not at the beginning; it was at the end. But yeah, he's like, our sprints are 2 weeks in length. We're gonna plan out 5 sprints and then have an innovation sprint after the 5th for a total of 12 weeks. And as a middle manager in the organization, where my team members were all part of different Scrum teams, I remember fighting a lot about like, this is ridiculous because we don't spend enough time in planning as it is. So whatever you plan the first sprint, like the second, third sprint is just going to be doing all the rollover from the first sprint.
Right.
And I have metrics to back it up. But any pushback against this, because again, the entire executive team went to this SAFE training. So people that normally don't interact with software development went to this SAFE training. The chief marketing officer, the chief revenue officer, the executive, the chief operations, they all went and they were told, this is how your product portfolio works, and this is how your development trains work, and this is the way it's done. So you plan your stuff, and at the end of the train, you get your release. So in the first sprint, we sat down in our big room planning to plan before the first sprint started, and it was an absolute train wreck, pun intended, and nothing in the first sprint was delivered because the leadership said, like, here are the things you're going to do in the first sprint. Like, they just dictated, here are the things you need to do. And the first sprint was like build an entire mobile app. It was just ridiculous things that you would never, it was obvious to me at the time that it wasn't something that could be done. But even if it could have been done in a sprint worth of work, it was putting a whole lot of development on one single developer. Build an Android mobile app. Okay, well, the company has one Android mobile developer. So one Android mobile developer is going to go off in a corner by himself for a whole sprint. And at the end of the sprint, he's going to come out and he's going to hold the tablets above his head. Now, here's what I have produced. That's ridiculous, right?
It is.
But the idea was the executives were so unwilling to hear any detractors to their plan. We went back. We got this placard. We paid all this money. We know it's going to work. Go do this. By the way, did not train anybody else in the company. Only the executives got trained and came back and said, we're going to run a PI planning now, and you guys are going to deliver in PIs. So think about this. That was my first introduction to SAFe, was some SPC or somebody came in and not only sold them on the training, you need to pay me X thousands of dollars for this training, but also they pitched these executives so well, they went back and tried to change the whole company. The whole company meaning just the development department, because no other department of the company was changed by this. No other department was affected by this. Only development. Again, if you're talking about getting hoodwinked, this is probably a great example about, like, they felt, since, hey, we pay good money to some consultant, and they said you guys should be able to plan this PI and be able to plan the next 12 weeks, and we told you what you need to do.
Right.
It was a disaster. It was a bunch of people left. You know what I mean? It was a complete disaster.
Yeah, but the people that brought in the person who basically launched this whole concept of using SAFe, etc., and trained everybody, they're not the ones that would admit that they failed, right? That's the problem. That they're not going to admit that, because if they admit that, that's a career suicide for them. So they won't do it. They'll just say, well, we're going to keep going, right? So we've done this, we're going to keep going. Oh, no, we don't have all the prerequisites of how to make SAFe work. We don't have dedicated people in all these roles. What's an RTE? We don't have one of those. Yeah. Just find somebody with a pulse and go, you're an RTE now, right? And this poor person who gets nominated to be an RTE has no idea what it means, save a few Google searches. Yeah. So guess what? It doesn't work. This is going back to our podcast topic. Agile doesn't work here. Well, guess what? It can't work there because you really didn't invest in it properly.
Right.
You were in that last example that we've been talking about the last few minutes. You were hoodwinked into it by those that have vested interests, basically. You need to make sure that you bring in people that do not have that. People that are really looking at your problem specifically, and they are agnostic of a given framework, etc., a given approach. And the hardest message for you to swallow would be when they say, you're not ready yet for Agile. Anything. Forget SAFe or whatever it is. You're not ready. You need to invest in these areas first. I long for the day when I deliver that message on my way out the door.
Yeah, I was going to say that
it's the right thing to do.
That would certainly be your way out of the door, both from the client and from the consulting firm, because I can't think of a single consulting firm that would ever say, hey, Agile's not right for you in the current way the organization is shaped and operating.
Right.
Like, we're not going to take this contract. Like, it's not going to be successful in the long run. Well, if you're a company and you're looking to hire somebody to do your software development for you or whatever, or to try to teach you how to do Agile, if you're trying to do that, I'd make sure that their incentives, their pay, their milestones, whatever it is, are tied to
your success.
Yeah, your success.
Yeah.
Specifically, your success with your customers and your success in terms of the efficiency and productivity of your development effort after they have exerted their influence and their efforts onto your company.
Yeah, I'd say don't be vested in the next snazzy thing, right? Just look for people that will really advise you with your interests at heart as opposed to their own interests at heart.
Well, I think we've cracked the code. If we've helped you, or not helped you, please let us know.
Let us know either way. And let us know what else you'd like to hear about. And subscribe and like that button down there.